I am presenting Union Gospel Press's Sunday School Lesson number 3, Sunday, March 17th, 2024. The lesson is entitled The Raising of Lazarus. Lesson text comes from John chapter 11, verses 38 through 44. Related scriptures are John 11, 1 through 37, Luke 10, 38 through 42, John 12, 1 through 11. The place is Bethany. The time is 30 AD. It is always helpful to intently read all the background verses before studying and teaching the scripture lesson. In this case, we learn that the Lord Jesus had a deep personal interest in and affection for the three siblings in the story. Yet, in his own assessment of the situation, Lazarus' death was intended to glorify God. Do the best you can to help your students see that life's circumstances are rarely what they seem to be, and that God can be glorified out of even the most dire events. While it is often hard to discern this is our own personal stories, it is clearly stated here that the story of Lazarus and his two sisters was recorded to show us this truth. Today's aim, facts, to show how Jesus is glorified through the raising of Lazarus from the dead. Principle, to understand that the glory of God is central in every aspect of life, even in the most difficult trials. Application, to trust God is working in every situation for his glory and our good. Illustrating the lesson. May God be glorified in our lives. Practical points. 1. Like Jesus, we should have a holy displeasure at the destruction brought on by sin. John 11:38. 2. God has a purpose even when his ways don't make sense to us. Verse 39, verse 4. 3. We will see God's glory when we believe Jesus. Verse 40. 4. Publicly thanking God for answered prayers and blessings can help others believe. Verses 41 through 42. 5. Our resurrection at the last day is certain because even death has to obey the voice of Jesus. Verses 43 through 44, chapter 5, verses 25 through 29. Golden text. When he thus had spoken, he cried with a loud voice, Lazarus, come forth. And he that was dead came forth, bound hand and foot with grave clothes. John 11:43 through 44. Today we have 3 lesson outlines. The first is the grave approached, John 11:38 through 40. The second is the prayer offered, John 11:41 through 42. And the third is the dead called forth, John 11:43 through 44. Introduction. It is easy to recognize the Lord's presence in the pleasant experiences of life. Jesus' presence blesses our weddings, births, baptisms, graduations, holidays, and other joyful occasions. But it is more difficult to recognize his presence in the hardships of life. Is he really there when we suffer financial reverses, natural disasters, automobile accidents, or lawsuits? Does he care when our children are sick and tottering on the brink of death? Where is he when families split apart, when we lose our jobs, or when we contract incurable diseases? Job's experience teaches us that we may never know why God allows us to suffer, but it also shows that he goes with us through the suffering. Jesus' ministry also reveals that he cared for the people in their times of deepest need. This week's lesson takes us to one of his most spectacular miracles, when he confronted death and overcame it by his divine power. The grave approached. John 11:38. Jesus, therefore, again groaning in himself, cometh to the grave. It was a cave, and a stone lay upon it. Verse 39. Jesus said, Take ye away the stone. Martha, the sister of him that was dead, saith unto him, Lord, by this time he stinketh, for he have been dead 4 days. Verse 40. Jesus saith unto her, Said I not unto thee, that if thou wouldest believe, thou shouldest see the glory of God? From our human point of view, the resurrection of Lazarus should not have been necessary. His sisters, Martha and Mary, had informed Jesus that their brother was sick, verses 1 through 3. Jesus could have gone immediately to Bethany and healed him, or if time was too short, he could have healed him from a distance, as he had the nobleman's son. Chapter 4, verses 46 through 54. Yet, in spite of his love for Lazarus and his sisters, he purposely delayed going to them, allowing Lazarus to die. Chapter 11, verses 5 through 6. Jesus' command, John 11:38 through 39a. Jesus' delay, however, did not mean he was indifferent to Lazarus' need, for as he approached the grave, he was groaning in himself. The word for groaning means deeply moved. It occurs in only 3 passages outside the 2 in this chapter, verse 30. In 2 of them, Matthew 9:30, Mark 1:43, it describes Jesus' stern warning for persons he healed to be quiet about their healing. In the 3rd, Mark 14:5, it refers to the disciples' angry scolding of Mary for wasting her perfume. Thus, the verb describing Jesus' reaction when he came to Lazarus' tomb speaks more of indignation than of sorrow. It was not anger against the mourners present, it was anger against Satan and the terrible tragedy he had brought upon the human race through sin. This, of course, was combined with genuine sorrow, for Jesus grieved with the sisters and their friends and wept. John 11:35. The onlookers interpreted his tears as a sign of his deep love for Lazarus. Verse 36. The grave in which Lazarus lay was a cave with a stone covering the entrance. Sometimes natural caves were used as tombs. More often, artificial tombs were created by hewing out limestone rock. Because of the rocky hills around Jerusalem, many such man-made tombs were found there. Some of these were hewed out horizontally, others were cut downward with steps leading down into the tomb. Inside the grave, there were often a number of shelves or niches for all the members of a family, and sometimes there was more than one chamber. To keep predatory animals from entering, a large stone was placed across the entrance, either vertically or horizontally. The fact that Lazarus was buried in such a tomb shows that his family was not poor. Their affluence may also be deduced from the many mourners from Jerusalem who joined them. John 11:19, 31, 33, and 45. And the costly perfume Mary later used to anoint Jesus. 12:3. This underscores a solemn truth. Death has no respect for social class. It is a fate that finally comes to all. But in this case, the death would not be final. Jesus would confront it with divine power. So he ordered the stone to be removed. He directed this to those who were present nearby, for it was no small task to remove the heavy stone. There were many bystanders who could have assisted in doing this. We can well imagine some hesitation in complying, however, for opening a tomb brought the risk of ritual defilement by contact with the dead. Adding to this hesitation was the question of why Jesus would want the stone removed. What possible purpose would it serve? The crowd had no expectation that a resurrection was about to take place. It is worthy of note that Jesus did not remove the stone himself. He assigned to the people around him a task that they could do and reserved for himself only what they could not. In his first miracle, 2 1 through 11, he had done something similar. Though he could have created wine out of nothing, he had instructed the servants to fill the jars with water, which he then turned into wine. Likewise, in this instance, though Jesus had the power to simply command the stone to move, he let others move it, preparing the way for what only he could do. Martha's objection, John 11:39b. To Martha, Lazarus' sister, the thought of removing the stone from the grave was utterly repulsive. Lord, she said, by this time he stinketh, for he have been dead 4 days. Whatever Jesus had in mind, she wanted to spare Lazarus and his family the indignity of disturbing his decomposing body. The smell of death could only add to the abhorrence of their situation. Under more circumstances, she would have been right. The warm climate would have done its nasty work. But had not Martha already expressed faith that God would answer any request Jesus made, verse 22? And had not Jesus assured her that her brother would rise again, verse 23? Yes, indeed, but even then her faith struggled to reach the conclusion that his resurrection was imminent. She preferred to think it would be at the last day, verse 24, even after Jesus reminded her that he was the resurrection and the life, verse 25. She seemed not to apply that truth to the present need. So at the grave, her faith faltered. Jesus' reassurance, John 11:40. Jesus responded to Martha's doubts with a mild rebuke that at the same time reassured her of the outcome. Said I not unto thee, asked Jesus, that if thou wouldest believe, thou shouldest see the glory of God? We do not find these exact words in his earlier conversation with her, verses 21 through 27, but they were the essence of what he had told her. In addition, when the sisters had first notified him of Lazarus' sickness, he had said that this illness was not unto death, but for the glory of God, verse 4. That manifestation of God's glory would come through Jesus' power to raise Lazarus from the dead. But only by faith would Martha be able to see that glory. This is still the key for us to see God's glory manifested in our midst. His power is always more than significant, but too often our lack of faith keeps us from seeing it displayed. Mark 6, 1 through 6, 9, 17 through 19. Earlier in his gospel, John declared, we beheld his glory, the glory as of the only begotten of the Father, 1:14. Thereafter, he cited numerous examples of the manifestation of Christ's glory. Jesus began to manifest that glory with his first sign in Cana, 2:1. And each subsequent sign revealed more. And now he displayed it in the most remarkable way of all, by overcoming the decay of death. It would be a foretaste of both his and his people's bodily glorification. John 17:5, 1 Corinthians 15:42 through 43, 1 Peter 1:21. The prayer offered. Verse 41. Then they took away the stone from the place where the dead was laid. And Jesus lifted up his eyes and said, Father, I thank thee that thou hast heard me. Verse 42. And I knew that thou hearest me always, but because of the people which stand by, I said it, that they may believe that thou hast sent me. Removal of the stone. John 11:41a. Martha was apparently persuaded by Jesus' response that the stone had to be removed from the tomb for her to see the glory of God manifested. So the bystanders obeyed Jesus' directions and took it away. It is doubtful that anyone present, except perhaps Mary, whose thoughts were not told, expected Jesus to actually restore Lazarus to life. Jesus' prayer, John 11:41b through 42. Jesus therefore preceded his miracle with a prayer to his Father, not so much for his own sake as for that of the bystanders. He did not petition his Father to raise Lazarus. He merely thanked him that he had already heard his petition. His will was so unified with his Father's that he already knew what the Father wanted him to do at Lazarus' tomb. Jesus alluded to his unity with the Father when he said, And I knew that thou hearest me always. Verse 42. The communion of minds and wills in the Father and the Son showed itself in the Son's obedience to the Father and the Father's witness to the Son's divine identity and mission. 5:18 through 37, 8:17 through 18, 10, 30, 36 through 38. A part of this witness was the Son's ability to give life. 5:21, 24 through 26. So Jesus prayed with confidence at the tomb. But the real reason for this prayer was for the benefit of the people standing by. Jesus desired that they believe that God had sent him. Thus, his prayer was audible and public. The crowd knew that he was addressing his Father, and when the miracle was performed, they would attribute it to him. They would also see Jesus as God's obedient Son, not calling attention to himself, but to the one who had sent him. Did the miracle that followed actually arouse their faith in those who saw it? As with all miracles, the results were mixed. The faith of the two sisters and Jesus' disciples obviously was strengthened. In addition, many of the friends present trusted him, 11:45. From them, the news spread quickly to many more who, upon seeing Lazarus alive, 12:9, placed their faith in Jesus. This miracle was a major reason for the huge crowds at the time of the triumphal entry, verses 17 through 18. But other witnesses of the sign went to the Pharisees and reported what had happened, 11:46. Then the Pharisees, in desperation, sought to kill Jesus, verses 47 through 53. They even tried to put Lazarus to death in order to destroy the evidence for the miracle, 12:10. So, the same supernatural work that softened some hearts and led to Jesus' triumphal entry into Jerusalem hardened others to murderous rage and led to his death. The dead called forth. Verse 43. And when he thus had spoken, he cried with a loud voice, Lazarus, come forth. Verse 44. And he that was dead came forth, bound hand and foot with grave clothes, and his face was bound about with a napkin. Jesus said unto them, Loose him and let him go. Jesus' command, John 11:43. Jesus turned from addressing his Father and stating the reason for his impeding action to address the dead man. He cried with a loud voice, Lazarus, come forth. It was not his usual practice to speak loudly. In fact, he fulfilled Isaiah's prophecy that he would not strive, nor cry, nor shall any man hear his voice in the streets. Matthew 12:19. One of the few times he cried out in a loud voice was on the cross just before he yielded his spirit to the Father. Luke 23:46. We have no reason to believe that cry from the cross was the victorious shout, "It is finished." John 19:30. His cry at Lazarus' tomb also signified a victory, victory over death and the one who had the power of death, Satan. Hebrews 2:14 through 15. Jesus had earlier foretold a day when all who were in graves would hear his voice and come forth. John 5:28 through 29. His call to Lazarus was a foreshadowing of that final resurrection. 1 Thessalonians 4:16. The duration of bodily decomposition, whether 4 days, as in this case of Lazarus, or thousands of years, makes no difference to him. It is the power of his word that restores life, just as the divine word brought life in its original creation. John 1 through 4, 5:21, 11:25. The dead man's response, John 11:44. Jesus' crisp command brought an immediate response. To the amazement of everyone, Lazarus came out of the grave. This was the third recorded time Jesus restored the dead to life. He brought back the daughter of Jairus shortly after she had died. Mark 5:35 through 42. The young man from Nan was being carried to the cemetery on the day of his burial, Luke 7:11 through 16. In those two cases, some might have argued that they had merely been unconscious, but in Lazarus' case, there could be no mistake. He was in the tomb 4 days. In fact, he came forth with grave clothes on, John 11:44. The Jews did not embalm bodies as the Egyptians did, but they did wash and anoint the body and wrap it with strips of cloth. The face was wrapped with a separate cloth, 19:39 through 40, 23 through 7. Lazarus appeared at the entrance of the tomb, still bound by these grave clothes. Some believe it took a separate miracle for Lazarus to reach the entrance still bound, but that was not necessary since the wrappings were not tied so tightly as to keep him from moving. Still, he would have had to hobble to the opening. His appearance was certainly incongruous, a living man wearing grave clothes. Jesus, however, soon remedied this matter. He ordered the bystanders to unwrap him and let him go. This would not only release Lazarus to live a normal life, but also provided proof that he was a real body and not an apparition. Jesus had directed others to remove the stone. Now he likewise had them free Lazarus. He did what only he could do in raising him, but let others do what they were capable of doing. Mark 5:43. This marvelous account reveals the extent of Jesus' divine power. As the resurrection and the life, John 11:25, he overcomes the power of man's last enemy, death. 1 Corinthians 5:26, 53 through 57. But it also reveals his compassion for those suffering grief. To be sure, he could prevent death from occurring, but in his infinite wisdom and love, he uses it to bring even greater blessing to those willing to trust him. Questions. 1. From a human perspective, why does Lazarus' death seem unnecessary? 2. Why was Jesus angry as he approached the grave of Lazarus? 3. What does the description of Lazarus' tomb reveal about his family's social status? 4. Why did Jesus ask others to remove the stone from the tomb? 5. What did Mary believe Jesus would raise Lazarus? Explain. 6. Why did Jesus pray before raising Lazarus? 7. Did the resurrection of Lazarus fulfill Jesus' desire to arouse faith in the onlookers? Explain. 8. How did this miracle help lead to the crucifixion of Jesus? 9. What was foreshadowed by Jesus' call for Lazarus to come out? 10. What still had to be done for Lazarus after he was raised? This concludes the Sunday School lesson for Sunday, March 17th, 2024. Thank you for listening. God bless.